Hey, everybody, we're doing something really special here for you. We are going to give you our live reaction to the announcement on CNN on who the next president's going to be. Are you ready, Professor
I'm
Aubrey?
so excited. I'm
All
so
right.
excited.
Yeah, they're just announcing it right now. And
Fuck.
If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I wanna talk to you. Friends talking nerdy.
welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and seated next to me, we have Professor Aubrey. And this week, we're going to be talking about something interesting. And we're going to be releasing this as pretty quickly after we record this because with this topic being what it is, it's a very timely matter. It's like, you wouldn't want to release an episode about Thanksgiving in April, right?
Right. Who cares?
Exactly. So what we wanted to do is discuss an article from our friends at Psychology Today from Dr. Diane N. Solomon, the narrative nurse practitioner. That's the label underneath her name. Imagine that. Like she walks into every room. I'm Dr. Diane Solomon, the narrative nurse practitioner. Dun, dun, dun.
Let me tell you a story.
Yes. Well, the story she wants to tell us is how to address post-traumatic stress after the election.
Ooh, yeah. It's a big topic. It's necessary.
It is. Now, we will go a little in depth after we go through the article, a little more in depth on our feelings about what we've experienced here the past few days. But as a reminder to folks, I think this article is something that I think we should keep in mind going forward because of how the media is today, because we don't have essentially the three channel setup with like with like just a few choices to choose from, like back in the day. In the 60s, you had your CBS, NBC, ABC, Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, whoever else was the ABC guy. I mean, fuck that guy, right?
Right.
Whoever heard of him. Yeah, but still, yeah, it was much simpler in those days. But as we've talked about, with the media landscape being what it is, there's so much to choose from, based on whatever belief you have. There's a news network out there for you. And I do think one thing that folks tend to get caught up in, and I have been very much guilty of that myself, is falling for that us versus them. We make it no secret about our political beliefs on this particular show here, and seeing some of the people on the other side that you see on the news with all of the Trump merchandise and all that stuff. It's like, how could you relate to that? Like, I would not want to meet somebody that was that hardcore into politicians I believed in. Do I want to see somebody who has Bernie Sanders shoes, Bernie Sanders hats, Bernie Sanders placards on their Prius?
Right. Like it's bizarre cult of personality.
It is, but I think what the point here of the article is going to talk about is that the best thing you can do in a time like this is not isolate yourself from humanity. It's like be upset, be sad at the results of the way they are, but you also have to acknowledge that sometimes people made a vote that was different than yours for reasons that they feel were justified, even if you think that justification is batshit crazy.
Yes. So people want to get along with other people. That's one of the basic goods, like the basic thing that we're trying to put in our lives. That is to be around people, to be accepted by them, to feel understood by them. And so that sense of community has been absolutely essential to our survival and evolution. When something like this happens, where 50% of the people believe that, abortion should be illegal, or trans people aren't entitled to life, basically, those are the things that I think about them. How could I possibly be in community with people that I feel that way about? And like you're saying, they didn't vote for that. They didn't vote for mass deportations. They didn't vote for, shooting Liz Cheney in the face. They didn't vote for felonies. Like, they didn't vote for the bad stuff. They perceived the economics to be better with Republicans or better with Donald Trump from the last time he was in office, which is demonstrably not true, but is what they believe. And I think that's why the vast majority of them voted for him, that and misogyny and racism.
And we'll get into that a little bit later because I could also counter that once again, the Democratic Party has found a spectacularly bad way to talk to people. And also, they ever since 2016 with Bernie Sanders and in 2020 with Bernie Sanders and this year with Biden dropping out at the last minute, they've prevented voices that they did not want to be heard from having the national stage at the Democratic Convention. I mean, look at the Democratic Convention this year. They did not let any Palestinian people talk.
Did they let any Jewish people talk?
I believe they did. I don't know if it was necessarily about the Israel-Gaza situation, but
Or
you
did they let any Israelis talk?
again, that I'm not sure. My point is that they made a specific point to not have the Gaza people there, and like when you have places like in Michigan, on the eastern side of Michigan, there's a huge contingent of Arab Americans that live there.
Really?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest Arab American populations in the country is in Michigan. And as we saw on a recent episode of Last Week Tonight, a lot of them, it's not that they wanted Trump in office. They felt that they weren't going to, they were going to continue to see the atrocities happen no matter what. And they just couldn't put their vote behind somebody that was just going to be all words and not actions towards Israel.
But Donald Trump is pro-Israel. He is pro-Netanyahu. It's going to be worse under Trump.
Again, like I said, people have their reasons. So how about I dive into the first bullet point here?
And let's, because obviously I need to read this article.
Yes.
I'm having some PTSD about it, honestly.
All right, number one, remember that black and white thinking, a common cognitive error, is not good for you or anyone else. Your nameless, faceless, opposing voters in the election have names and faces. Their beliefs or actions may seem crazy to you, but perhaps they love their kids as you do. Maybe they dream of the same things for their family. Might they lend a cup of sugar or help with a flat tire if you're in need? Realizing the common humanity of others, no matter how misguided you find their beliefs, softens othering. It decreases hostility, hurt, and distance between opposing factions, encouraging us to think beyond black and white. Try to stay in the gray. And what I would challenge anybody out there, with, beliefs like mine, is to not fall for the trick that is easy to fall for, that I've fallen for myself, of thinking that the other, in this case, people whose political beliefs I disagree with, are all the same as I see them presented to me in the news media that I consume. That is just not the case. I mean, like I said, I'm a progressive, and I'm not a conservative in any way, shape, or form. There was no way I was ever even going to consider voting for Trump. But I think the thing that I've seen people do in the past, and again, hand in the air, I've been guilty of it myself, is thinking that the images you see of people on TV, whether it's on MSNBC, on The Daily Show, where they're making fun of them, the people that have the Trump memorabilia and they're talking out of their ass and they don't make any sense, that every single person that voted for Trump is that. Not true. There are plenty of people that we would still consider reasonable people that voted for him that think that those people are goofs as well. It is our job going forward, I think, to be able to talk to those reasonable people that still voted for Trump while we still can. It's this othering, this whole thing of they voted for someone I did not vote for, so they are an enemy, I think is part of the problem. Because I think back to that documentary we saw a few years back, Hillbilly,
Uh-huh.
and it's like a lot of the people that the director of that documentary interviewed, including family members, had very valid concerns that were just not being addressed by the Democratic Party whatsoever. As the director of that movie pointed out, the Republicans will talk a great game and be very personable and make those people feel heard,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of following up on that, they never do. It's always something that we'll do it next time. We'll do it next time. And I think the Democrats have been guilty of it as well. Like, think of what Joe Biden said about, we'll codify Roe. And then Kamala Harris is trying to do the same thing, even though you really have to get a Senate up to, 60 Democrats to be able to get something like that passed.
Yeah.
And that is not something that, at least in the next decade, I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think we're going to continue to have this type of loggerheads. So it's like politicians will say a lot of stuff to try to get people to vote for them. And yes, it is imperative that you understand that for politicians that you support, sometimes they will say they're going to be for something, but are just not able to do it. However, sometimes too, they will just say stuff to try to get you to vote for them and not follow through. But I think, again, this point here is it's also to, I guess, remember that a person voted for Trump. They are not Trump. We may disagree with their beliefs, but they are not active members of the Republican Party,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. But you're eager to talk.
Yeah. So my problem with that is it ignores facts, right? You might believe that the world is flat, but that is not true. The earth is round. So my neighbor thinks the world is flat. I think that person is an idiot. And that's sort of what's going on here.
But when it comes to politics, though, I mean, like I mentioned,
It's a political thing, facts or no facts.
but when you have the media echo chamber that people put themselves into, if they are constantly getting fed something from the media echo chamber that they are a part of, they're going to believe it to be true. You may go to your neighbor across the street who says the earth is flat and say, how could you believe that? And they will bring up, oh, I heard it from this. I heard it from this. And it will sound legit. But no, it's not, because to your point, yeah, something like that is not a fact. And I think, I think it is important, if someone has a political belief that is in your life that you disagree with, I don't think there is anything wrong with having conversations with them of why. That doesn't mean getting into shouting matches, getting into fist fights or anything like that.
I will punch a Nazi. I will punch a Nazi in the face.
Okay, I get that. And I have no problem with that. But again,
So this is a matter of degree. Once again, I'm doing the black and white thinking.
yeah.
I'm doing the thing that the article is telling us not to do. I'm just demonstrating it.
Well, again, it's something I've been guilty of myself. And again, but to be clear, though, this is not a what about situation, or I'm not trying to make it to where people shouldn't be held responsible for the actions that they chose. But again, when we're talking about just someone who just voted for somebody who is not a member of the Republican Party, is not in politics, is not in Washington making those votes, I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to suffer the same consequences that we are. The neighbor across the street that voted for somebody else. So instead of being a jerk and being like, fuck you and all that, if you can be neighborly, if that is a possibility, then that would allow you the chance to be able to, in theory, cross fingers, be able to talk some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And also being able to talk to somebody of different opposing views. You may not agree with their view, but you may find out that maybe they came to their belief in a way that, okay, I kind of get that. And once you get to that point, then maybe there's something that could work towards making it a compromise or whatever. But it's basically, yeah, don't make people the enemy necessarily. Should they be held responsible for their actions? Sure. Should you blatantly let them, if we go back to our episode about boundaries, like say stupid stuff or whatever, like am I going to go to a family reunion and hear my family members talk crap about immigrants? No, I'm not going to do that.
Hmm.
But you have to fight that urge of making people that voted for people that you did not agree with the enemy.
And the whole point of this is to feel better, to decrease the amount of cortisol in your system, to increase the amount of like calming, pleasant neuroreceptors as opposed to cortisol. And that's good. I often say that people who get really upset at things and yell at people, traffic, or, walking down the street or whatever. So, really, I feel bad for people who are angry. Like, it doesn't hurt anyone for me to be angry other than me. Like, I could be angry at you. I'm going to feel worse about that because I'm the one that's feeling the negative emotion of anger. I'm going to feel worse than you are. You might feel confused. You might feel hurt, but you're probably not going to be angry with me, right?
Agreed.
So I would be the person in that scenario who was suffering. And so it's you're punishing yourself when you're already down, you're already disappointed, and trying to decrease that is going to be good for us.
Yes, because your neighbor across the street is not necessarily going to be the one that's making the decision to do bad things along the way. They just voted for that person, yeah, it's if to your point, like in a relationship, if you don't talk about that anger, it builds up, and then you just get to a point to where you don't want to talk about that person. If you can take that time to be able to talk about your anger with somebody else, then that can build a bridge. Not that they would ultimately change their mind, or not that you would ultimately change your mind, but again, a meeting of the minds at the end of the day. I've had conservative friends in the past, plenty of them. And we've been able to find common ground in some things because, again, like not all conservatives think the same thing. There are plenty of conservatives. There are not plenty. There are conservatives out there that do believe in pro-choice. There are not many, but
Yeah.
but there are. And stuff like that. It's you don't want to make people the enemy at the end of the day. But how about you dive into number 2? I think that will let people know a way to move forward, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So let's say you're still having that black and white thinking because you just can't, you're like me and you just can't stop.
Man, I'm going to kick their ass.
So here's some more advice. Be curious to grow compassion. There's a reason people believe what they do. So instead of asking, what's wrong with them, try, what happened to them? Who hurt them? No, it doesn't say that, but that's what it makes me think of. What happened to them? Maybe they grew up scraping and hoarding every penny, or were uneducated. Were they bullied and now reflexively bully others? You needn't agree with them to understand how they might have become the way they are. Be curious. Curiosity helps loosen hate and fosters compassion. And even if you're trying compassion just to negate the poor health effects of affective polarization, it still works. So you can pretend that you're curious. Like, even if you're not actually curious, you can be like, I'm going to ask people questions. I'm just going to ask people questions about themselves. And that is a conversation.
It could also be something like what I've talked about with myself in terms of finding other voices out there. Like for me, I've done my best to try to find other political voices in like the podcast sphere that are not, polemic or anything like that. I'm not talking the Young Turks, which, I mean, the politics they talk about on the Young Turks is generally stuff I agree with, but it's still no better than a Breitbart.
That's how I feel about Rachel Maddow.
She's like a more palatable version of that, for me at least.
I don't like the sound of her voice. I mean, I think I'm the only liberal who's like, no, I can see how that's an echo chamber. Like, I see how the Hartman radio show is, maybe he's saying things that are true. Maybe she's saying things that are true. But the way she says them is like baiting and leading, and it's not just presenting information.
I mean, let's talk about Rachel Maddow for a second. I think back before the 2016 election, when Chris Christie was still the governor of New Jersey, and they had a little scandal at I believe it may have been the Brooklyn Bridge. There's like a bridge between New York and New Jersey. On the New Jersey side, they have, official people that will, be there to monitor for like tolls and stuff like that. But people in Chris Christie's administration were upset at somebody, so they fucked up traffic for like a few days just out of spite.
Whoa.
And Rachel Maddow made that a story on her national news program for weeks. Because we knew that at some point Chris Christie was going to enter the 2016 race. Earlier, I think the big reason why why she ended up doing that was because I guess New Jersey at one point did have a hurricane or some natural disaster that occurred, and this was while Obama was still president, and Chris Christie was like, come on, join me, let's get this fixed. And, which is what you want to see a politician do in a situation like that. You want them to invite it should be an all hands on deck situation to get everybody back up and running again. But, just because he made that endeavor to show that he was willing to do that as a politician, he had to be brought down.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he would have been a good president in any way, shape, or form, but I do respect a politician that will do that. He shook Obama's hand, toured around places and whatnot, did all the things that politicians do. And, there were plenty of Republican politicians during the Obama years that would not do that. I think back to the Arizona governor, where I forgot her name, but when Obama came, they just got into a shouting match on the airport tarmac. Yeah, but anyway, just hearing those other voices that I listen to, like Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman, part of the Tea Party, but ended up leaving because of Trump. I think did a lot of good for me to hear his reasoning behind, some of his beliefs. And again, not that I agree with his beliefs, but it's like, okay, I can get that. And once you get to that point, I think it makes it easier to be able to talk to somebody else. It doesn't become my way is right, because, you can, it does help grow compassion by being curious, So again, I would challenge anybody, and I've said this before and I will continue to say it, challenge yourself by finding a voice politics wise that says something that you don't agree with, but that you can listen to and tolerate. That's not, polemic. I'm not talking about, putting on Sean Hannity or anything like that. And I have no problem throwing his name around because he's one of the people, thanks to the Dominion lawsuit, that was on record talking about, let's not tell our viewers what reality is and keep on giving them the hope that Trump will win in 2020. That's a liar. Sorry. You do that, you don't deserve, you shouldn't, in a real world, that should have disqualified him from ever being on the air. But as we see today, that doesn't matter.
Nope.
But again, for the average person, no, just hearing some voices, if you hear the logic behind why people made their decision, then you can understand it, because like I think of, if we take a look at this election right now, like we talked about it this morning that, I guess Trump had 11% Latino support.
Yep.
And that boggles my mind. You know, you could go on the one hand and criticize them for thinking, you know, that the reason they voted was that they thought it was not that they were not going to be one of the people that would ultimately be deported, but we don't know the reasons. I don't personally know a Latino person that voted for Trump, so I can't ask them why. The news media, of course, will come out over time, over the next couple of months, with more detailed poll results and all that stuff to talk about that. But, if you had a chance to sit down with a Latino person who supported him and to hear their logic, again, maybe you still don't agree with their vote, but maybe you can come to a point to where you can say, okay, maybe in your shoes, I maybe would have considered it. You don't know. That can help with compassion.
Yeah, and again, I just have to tell myself, so I'm going to tell you guys. The point of this is to feel better, to not feel, because it doesn't help anything or anybody for me to be miserable. Doesn't change anything. So why would I choose that? It interferes with my health. It interferes with, being a happy person, which is ultimately what I want, is to be a happy person. So that's why I would do these things. In my head, when you're talking about them, what I'm screaming is no fucking compromise. Like, no, I will not accept that it makes sense for a Latino man to vote for Donald Trump. Like, I won't do that because it makes sense for the Republican-y ones of them. And it's only 11%. And most groups do not vote as a block. Like women do not vote as a block, unfortunately. Although we voted a little bit different. The genders voted a little bit different this time than usual.
Yeah. I think the next point kind of expands a little more on what you were just saying here, so I will dive into that. Remind yourself, judgments are bad for your health. We all get judgmental. It's a normal human reflex that's hard to notice, let alone change. Remind yourself that you want to notice your judgments. Soon you'll become aware of moments when you're looking at someone's hair and extrapolating their politics, or listening to someone talk and figure out how smart they are or aren't. Gently remind yourself you don't know what's true for them. They could be growing their hair after cancer treatment or have a haircut scheduled that day. They may have earned a PhD in physics but use a basic vernacular in public. Judgments are often wrong. Challenge yours. I go back again to that documentary we saw, Hillbilly, and how they talked about how rich folks in the South are the ones that helped stoke Southern bias.
Oh, yeah.
And how that Southern bias over time has made it to where a lot of people in states like ours here in Oregon will dismiss the South completely, despite the fact that I still believe at this point over 50% of the African American population are still in the South. So when you completely dismiss the South, you're dismissing them. You're also dismissing, when it comes to abortion, you're dismissing all the women who live in those states who don't have the financial freedom to go to a different state to take care of their health.
So, and that's where the politics comes in. Because if you're not going to win Alabama, why should you care at all about people in Alabama if your only motivation is to be in office? Which is what I feel about Donald Trump, right? He doesn't care about other humans. He just wants to be the king of the world.
I think it's pretty clear at this point. I don't think I'm saying anything too controversial by saying he's a transactional president. And I don't think that's a good thing. And I would say the same thing if there was a Democrat in office that did the things that he did. There is no moral reasoning behind it. Say what you will about George W. Bush. It's like he still had stuff that he thought he was doing that was right. He was wrong, but,
He wasn't wrong about everything. Like, certainly Laura Bush and George Bush did some good things for some people. But looking back now, I mean, I seethed with hatred of George W. Bush. But looking back on him, and this nostalgia influences this as well, but I look back on it and I think they weren't so bad. Like, I shouldn't have judged them as harshly as I did.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's like I would say, when it comes to the George W. Bush example, he would be very low on the list of presidents that were good at their job during my lifetime. You know, when you have Reagan, that's a special thing, and Trump, ooh, even better. But still, at the end of the day, it's like when a politician goes into office, they're gonna make decisions, and their decisions will either work or they won't. Some people may think that that the decision that a politician makes is good, and someone else may disagree with that. But that's why they're put into office, I guess, to make those decisions, and they're going to be responsible for the outcome of what those decisions are. Like, we go back to the 80s with Ronald Reagan. The fact that he ignored the AIDS epidemic as long as he did needlessly killed thousands upon thousands of people. I'm not saying it could have been cured instantly or whatever. I'm not saying there would have been zero deaths if he immediately from day one put all the government's money into fixing it. But, we could have saved a lot more lives.
I mean, we see what happened with COVID, and HIV is a viral infection, just like COVID.
And now we have a situation to where we can turn on the television today and see, drugs made available for people suffering with HIV and AIDS, something we would not have seen in the 80s. But it's like, when it comes to that, I think it is fair to say Reagan really fucked up with that.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean he was an evil mustache twirling villain? Maybe not the best example there, but you get my point. It's like somebody.
He wasn't a baby killer, so.
Well,
He probably was.
That's the thing, though, when it comes to presidents, though. It's like you may like them, but you have to judge them based on their actions. Like, look how much I can probably imagine in the 90s you loved the Clintons.
Oh, yes.
And now we can look back on the entirety of the Clinton administration and see how that was the seed planted for the crap that we're facing now. I'm not saying Clinton is solely responsible for everything, but a lot of the decisions his administration made have come to harm this country in so many ways.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the Clintons have a checkered legacy for sure. But at the time, given the choices and given the era and, the fact that we can't have 20/20 vision and we can't, know now what we know in hindsight, some of those policies might have made sense at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he was trying to work with a Republican Congress,
Mm-hmm.
and that led to a lot of bad stuff. Like one thing I can bring up that's kind of innocuous, but I think was still a very bad decision, was the repealing of the rule that prevented companies from owning like huge swaths of TV and radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
Doing that helped lead to the nationalization of news. It led to, newspapers kind of dying away.
Mm-hmm.
It led to, local news being more and more irrelevant as time went on. It led to radio. It led to, instead of regionally, you had DJs or program directors that would choose the music that they felt the people in their area would want to listen to. You now had one person stating everywhere in the country is going to listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think of bands that made it big. Like, I mean, I've been critical of Kiss before in the past, but they didn't first hit it big in New York. They first hit it big in Michigan. Not only because of their concerts, but because you had people on the radio putting it out there regionally, and then it grew from there.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's environment, they never would have broke.
Oh, come on.
I don't think they would have. I don't think they would have hit it big in any way, shape, or form. They would have probably found an audience, sure, but in terms of the stage show they were putting on, even in the 70s era, cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, don't judge, like, it instantly judging somebody based on the fact that, in this particular case, they made a choice on the ballot box different than you. You don't know their logic. You don't know why they made that choice. So judging them just because they say they made that choice without taking the time to hear why is just bad. I think it is.
Sure.
How about you dive into the next one?
Okay, number 4. Seek out those with differing beliefs and like them anyway. Try attending a community meeting on a non-political subject or a workout class at your local community center. Strike up a conversation with the cashier at the grocery store or fellow fan at the soccer field, someone you don't anticipate becoming fast friends with, but whom you see enough to grow rapport with. Talk about the weather, the kids, family, spouses, dating, dinner, the price of gas, or the local sports team. Anything in common to connect. We traditionally avoided politics at communal gatherings for a reason. They're divisive. But friendships or acquaintanceships across party lines are not. You might surprise yourself and actually like the person.
This one I think is dependent on geography. Like us here in Portland, Oregon, we're kind of in a progressive bubble.
Well, and the conservatives here are radicalized because they have to put up with us.
That can happen. I mean, Rush Limbaugh did get his start in Northern California after all.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we had the Proud Boys, like they were very active in this area. One of the founders was from Vancouver, Washington. So, and we have a long history of violent racism.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not saying look out for somebody who's a member of the Proud Boys and become friends with them. We're not advocating that. But what we are advocating again is just if the next door neighbor is an accountant and they made a vote that you didn't agree with necessarily, what is wrong with striking up a friendship, getting to know them, because you don't want to make them the other. Because it's like, yeah, maybe the election didn't go the way you wanted today, but cross fingers, there will be another one at some point. And if you are friends with this person, that could potentially give you a chance to convince them otherwise, make a different choice next time. But also, too, it makes it to where you don't fall for that trick that the media does of giving it based on where you obtain your news, of giving you the impression that people of the opposing party act and look a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And because that is wrong. Like, it is just wrong for people to think that every single Trump supporter, it has like American flags out of the back of their pickup truck and they're listening to Kid Rock, while drinking Hulk Hogan beer.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not trying to say people should not be held responsible for their actions here. This is not about trying to whitewash, for lack of a better phrase, people's actions. They should be held responsible for that. But voting for a candidate is different than being a candidate. And I think that is something to keep in mind.
You're very, very generous.
I try, but how about I dive into the last point here?
Okay, let's hear it.
All right. Avoid politics, but nothing else. Avoidance is a prevalent symptom of PTSD, avoiding people, places, and things that remind you of the trauma, and conquering that avoidance can be healing. Avoidance creates bigger, separate silos and a deeper partisan divide. Escaping our echo chambers and associating with diverse groups opens us up to new perspectives. Seek a varied group of friends, acquaintances, neighbors, colleagues, and/or workout pals. You will open your horizons and enjoy it too. I think back in the early days of the pandemic when we were traveling up to Astoria. We stopped off the highway to go to a gas station to use the restroom and buy some snacks. We mask up in the car. We get out of the car. We approach the door. The door has a sign on there saying, "Please wear a mask." We walk in. It's all the locals, including the cashier behind the counter, without a mask on, looking like we just walked into a Klan rally with a Boy George outfit.
Yep.
But still, we did the good thing, and they did the good thing of, we went in there, just did our business. We got our stuff, paid for it, walked out. We didn't have any of them say, "Hey, why are you wearing a mask?" or anything like that. And we didn't go in there like, "Where's your mask?" or anything like that. We just lived our lives. And I think that that was a good thing. Now, did we stop and have conversations with people? No, this is the early days of the pandemic. We were both like, ew, ew, we want to get out, ew, ew, ew. And I think we both had hand sanitizer in the car afterwards.
Mhm.
But still, I would count that as a positive experience because, again, I'm sure they probably went home and a couple of them commies from Portland, stopped into town. But again, we weren't the stereotypes that they think that are out there. Just like we didn't encounter the stereotypes we thought we would see, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And I think when you're in a town like this, especially, like I said, it can be a little tough to find people of opposing views, but that's the beauty of technology as well. Like being a professional wrestling fan, I'm going to run into people with different political views. I mean, we're of course talking about the industry that gave us Hulk Hogan ripping off his shirt at the Republican National Convention. He defecated on his legacy a long time ago, people, so that didn't shock me.
Yeah.
Again, put yourself out there. It's like whether it comes to politics or Southern bias or anything like that, if you think people are a certain way, act a certain way, just with no real life experience to prove that apart from the fact that other people have said that, challenge yourself. If we're going to use the South example, that doesn't mean people shouldn't be held responsible for their actions, because if they do have a history of being racist while living down there, then they should be held responsible for that. But if they're just people that work, do their thing, try to raise a happy family, and just try to be good pillars in their local community, that breaks that mold of what people expect. And I think when it comes to politics as well, both sides should be going out of their way. The regular citizens now, mind you, not the politicians, they're going to continue to do their thing, but the average citizen out there needs to understand that. I mean, the polls show people more often than not generally agree on the same things, regardless of party line. It's just the politicians, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which are both private businesses, people,
Mhm.
want to have that divide. And the news media that was begging for consumers to choose their product over the other are going to want to continue to push that divide. Again, I'm not saying people shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. I'm not trying to say just why can't we all just get along? But there is an opportunity here, I think, for people to grow, I guess, because part of this divisiveness is because we've have this othering that is poisoned our political thought.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is not making friends with a Nazi. It is not talking to the Proud Boys or the Charlottesville people or the January 6th people. Like, those are not the people we're talking about.
Or the Marjorie Taylor Greene fan club. No.
Right. But like normal people, meaning not fascists, those are the people that you're talking about, right? We don't need to go humble ourselves and be curious about and have compassion for the people who are actually doing the things that are disgusting and despicable.
Exactly, because one thing you will hear people from the other side when it comes to, in this case, Trump, it's because of the media echo chamber the way it is. They think that we as progressives are just in a huff. It's overblown. Guys making jokes. He's not that bad. It couldn't be that bad. And in this particular situation, I disagree with them, but I think more often than not, you're going to get somebody willing to listen to you if you don't just immediately, you're a baby killer or something like that. Just you win more hearts with compassion than hate.
And I've always really admired people who could do that, who could engage with anyone. And for some people that's their job. Like for instance, religious leaders. Some of them, right, try to influence their congregations to be political, but others of them are just trying to be helpful and care for the people in their community. And those are the people who I would have a conversation with.
Exactly. we are at a time in our country to where we need to get past this divide. It can be done because we've been divided before. I mean, history shows nations will get divided. There's peaks and valleys, right? There are good times, there are going to be bad times. We're currently in a bad time right now, but one way we can fix this is by having more compassion. Instead of hating somebody who voted for a candidate you did not like, maybe taking the time to find out why can open the doors to conversations that you wouldn't have had before, to where maybe you can understand why. Because, like, I bring up the Latino vote for Trump, the 11% on the initial reaction is like, why the fuck would you do that? But have I taken the time to search these people out and ask them why? I have not as of yet. I mean, when the information does come out, political podcasts I listen to, I guess they talked about like in a couple of months after an election, like Pew Research will have like a detailed history of why people ended up voting. They'll have a voter log or something like that. And there will be more detailed responses as to why people made that choice. And it will be interesting. Yeah, not much more to say, I guess, on this particular topic. It's a great article. Go to our show description. You can click the link and it will take you right to it. Definitely recommend giving it a read. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I've got a lot to think about.
It's hard, but channel your inner Mr. Rogers. I guess that wouldn't hurt, right?
I mean, think about people you admire who are good people like that.
Yeah, exactly. So hang tight and listen to one of our friends in the podcast world talk about their show.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Dawn Brody, a comedian with a history degree and the host of the podcast HILF, History I'd Like to Fuck. Each episode, I am joined by a new guest who has brought me a subject from history that they want to know more about. Then I hit the books, I dig deep in the annals, and stimulate. We've covered Frankenstein, Houdini, Joan of Arc, Pompeii, the Salem witch trials, right? Ugh. Join us and find out for yourself that history is a party and everybody's coming.
All right, welcome back. Before we wrap things up here, let's kind of decompress and talk about our feelings as to when we heard the news.
Yeah.
I guess you were actually helping with the Harris campaign here in Portland, Oregon, in terms of making calls and stuff like that.
Yeah. I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah. We have you to blame for the election. It's
Right.
Aubrey's fault.
It's my fault. It's my fault. But like, I haven't been trained to speak to people on the phone and stuff. And I was at a watch party when I saw the election returns. And then it was the middle of the night when I got up to go to the bathroom, like 2:30 in the morning, that I saw that Trump had won the election.
I had an inkling rather early on, just with the numbers that were coming in showing that, like county by county in like Pennsylvania, for instance, she just wasn't reaching the numbers that like Biden was reaching in 2020. I had that sinking feeling rather quickly, and I was texting you right away, like, we're fucked. I did mostly stay off of social media in terms of seeing stuff, but I did post Nearer My God to Thee, the song played on the Titanic as it was sinking. And then I also popped a link for the song I'm Afraid of Americans from David Bowie.
Yeah.
That was my initial reaction, and I am still flabbergasted that this was the decision the country made, but it was a fair election. The choice has been made. And to be clear, I want to put this out there in audio form right away. I would love it if 4 years from now, if there is another election, regardless of who's elected, if it is a fair election, that somebody can come back and say, what about those fears you had, Tim? I would love to be able to say, I'm glad I overreacted.
Yeah. I mean, when I see the election, I'll be surprised.
There's a lot of things to be scared about for the coming years because, like, as the Democrats talked about during the election, Project 2025 is a thing. The Republicans went out of their way. What's that? I don't know what 2025 is. What's a number? But now, since the election's over, Rolling Stone magazine has an article out about how, politicians and whatnot are like, oh yeah, we're totally doing that. You know, and the thing to keep in mind with that Project 2025, there are think tank groups like the Heritage Foundation, which did Project 2025. There are think tank groups similar to that for progressives, and commonly what they will do is put stuff like this together to give to a new administration to run on. That doesn't mean they're going to follow and do every single thing on that list, of course, but when you have Project 2025 talking about, like, getting rid of birth control, banning pornography, banning books that could be perceived as pornography, books, words, stuff like that, and now they're openly stating that they're totally cool with Project 2025 now. I fear for this country again. 4 years from now, if the Project 2025 thing ends up not becoming a real big thing, again, I will be the first to say it. I'm glad it was just me overreacting. It's going to be an interesting 4 years. Now, I did receive a text from a family member. I'm not going to name who they are, but I do want to comment on it on the show here.
Okay.
It started off due to a post I made on the show's Instagram page, and it was just a panel from an old Captain America comic book, but it's lines that they also used in the film, and also just a great motivational monologue, really, when it comes to fighting for what's right. And I'll read it right now. It's Captain America saying this, folks. Doesn't matter what the press says. Doesn't matter what the politicians or the mob say. Doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. Very vague, of course, but again, when it comes to defending your beliefs, I think it's that good little motivational bump, a spike of endorphins in your head when you read that. It's like, yeah, you're right, type of deal. Like, it's coming from Captain America, folks, so it's not like the I have a dream speech or anything like that, but is what it is. And I think, in this current environment, I think it is something that, we as progressives could keep in mind going forward. But the family member in question wrote to me, replying here to your FTN post with Captain America. This is America, Tim. White nationalism is what the United States is. This is completely America, white male-centric only. And I hate it here. I hate that there is a high possibility that my life will be ruined because of the white people in this country. And I hate that I have no quote-unquote clout to influence people to see their hatred. A valid view.
Very valid view. Very valid view. I mean, I say that all the time.
Yeah, she does, folks.
I mean, it's true. It's true. White nationalism, xenophobia, racism, sexism, homophobia, like all of the things, they're like a disease, and the people who have them need to be cut out.
And wow, I'm ready to roll.
Well, I'm like Trump, right? Like, let's see how you act when you've got 9 barrels of guns trained on your eyes. That's what you see when you look out.
Yeah, I mean, I just think back to our history, though, as a country. Like, what if the people at the Stonewall Inn in the 60s decided, I'm tired of this. I'm just going to move to Canada.
Exactly.
What if in the early 20th century, Susan B. Anthony and all of them were like, we can't get the vote here. Let's move to another country.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back to the abolitionists in 1800. What if they just gave up because of all the crap they were getting? It's like I get that not everybody is going to want to fight. If you had, like, if it's like if I had to live in a black man's shoes in the South in the 1930s, like, I don't know if I could have the strength to be able to go through what they did.
But I think that the human will to live and the human desire to share love with people is so strong that when you think about your loved ones, that's what you stay alive for.
Yeah. I mean, to me,
People can do amazing things because of love.
they can. And that's important to remember. I think, and I've talked about this briefly on the show before, but I think the thing to keep in mind, and it becomes easier to grasp this concept the older I get, but like appreciate it's hard really to appreciate the advancements that we do have in this country when there's still a lot of inequality for people as well. It's like it's hard to appreciate the good that has been made because like in our lifetimes we've seen some amazing things change compared to what they were in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And that is important to keep in mind, but that doesn't mean you quit fighting. And as a white male myself, I was born with this privilege. I realized that, if I had the financial means to buy a brand new BMW, I would not be pulled over by the cops and accused of stealing that car.
Right.
Which is not to say every cop would do that, but there are enough that do that make it a valid example.
Yeah.
It's not a privilege I asked for. It's not a privilege I purchased, but it is a privilege that does come with a responsibility, I think. And that is to do your best to pay it forward in a way that you can. And to quote the guy from The Godfather, I believe in America. I do. I'm sorry. Sorry, not sorry. It's like, think of the fact that we can put out a podcast talking about our negative thoughts about a politician for the world to hear. Some people in this world can't do that.
Oh, for sure.
And as long as we still have that tool available to us, you fight.
Well, it's really easy to look around the world and be grateful to be here.
Yeah. But again, like, that is coming from my eyes only. I can only relate to the experience that I've lived in this life. I can't put myself in the shoes of other people who've had much different circumstances. Like, someone who was born in America and falls in love with someone who may themselves be undocumented or have family members that are undocumented. And the worst case scenario with what they've already said that they are going to try to attempt in the new Trump administration with mass deportations and revoking citizenship for certain people, yeah, I can't imagine what that stress would be like. And I can also imagine that if I were in those shoes, maybe my opinion would be different. But I can still try in my very small way, because it's not like we have a huge bullhorn here, but it is a bullhorn.
Yeah.
But I also have kids myself. I think of my oldest, and like when we all saw wrestling together, I was so proud of him when he was talking about like feminist stuff at when we had lunch before.
Yeah, he's very progressive. Every time I interact with him, he says something really cool.
Yeah. And we may not see the change. Like, we're going to be in a lot of hurt in this country for a long time. And there's not going to be one politician that's going to be able to pop into view, snap their fingers and fix it. It certainly won't be the Democratic Party. There has to be a complete overhaul at this point of the Democratic Party, because the current leadership that has been running it since at least 2016 has failed this country in so many ways. The 2016 election and the 2024 election, under normal circumstances, should have been an easy route. Trump should have never had a chance to get to the places that he has. But it was in my opinion, the failures of the Democratic Party to listen to people. Like 2016, Bernie Sanders was on quite the roll, but there is definitive proof out there that the Democratic Party went out of their way to make sure he would not get that nomination. They did the same thing in 2020. And this year, because Biden waited until the last fucking minute to say, whoops, my bad, maybe it would be good if I bounce. Here's Kamala, who was not tested through the primary system or anything. To some people, I could see to where they would think that she was like, quote unquote, ordained or something like that. Kind of like the Hillary Clinton thing in 2016 of it's just expected. And I could see, I mean, that's rubbed me the wrong way. Even though I felt Kamala was a great choice, it would have been nice to have a primary, to be able to have different candidates. It would have been nice to have Gretchen Whitmer, you know, as a possibility, governor of Michigan. Gavin Newsom, I think, would be a great choice because I think he gets how the Republican machine runs and has kind of adopted some of that himself in terms of how he talks. Like, he's the guy who went to Florida and had a debate with Ron DeSantis. Just two governors debating, just a dick swinging contest more than anything. But we need people like that. What about Pete Buttigieg? Wouldn't it have been nice if he had a chance? He's one of the few Democratic politicians that can go on Fox News and stand toe to toe with them. There aren't many Democratic politicians that go on Fox News, and I think that's also kind of a bad thing as well. That what I would like to see the Democrat, or whether it's the Democrats or any other progressive leaning party that gains national attention and the ability to potentially get the White House, like staying in the echo chamber of MSNBC or CNN or whatever is going to continue to bring these results. When you're not going to the places where the average person are, whether it be on a separate news channel or finding them on new media out there like podcast. The Joe Rogan is the most listened to podcast out there. Trump did it. JD Vance did it. Kamala didn't. That's not to say she would have won if she did it, but she would have potentially reached some ears that wouldn't have searched her out to begin with. Because I think a few years back, Bernie Sanders was on the Joe Rogan podcast, sat there for 3 hours, and you had plenty of people come out of the woodwork on social media that were like, I'm conservative, I wouldn't vote for the guy, but I liked a lot of what he said. Like, I don't know what the future is going to hold. I think people need to be careful around social media now. This is the doomsday worst case scenario thing in play here. But I think, if you are of the progressive bent, really watch what you put out there on social media. But in terms of whether it be the Democratic Party or if there is another party that does magically come within the next 4 years that could potentially run for president, progressives need to find a way to speak to people a lot better than they are, because it's not been working.
Yeah. I mean, that's clear. With that...
Well, at the end of the day, we don't know what the future is going to hold. Be careful and keep fighting.
And love each other.
Damn it. We are neighbors. Won't you be my neighbor?
I will be your neighbor.
Okay. Anything else you want to say to our friends at home?
Nope. Just hope your election stress will slowly dissipate.
And if you're a Nazi, I'm going to punch you.
And I will punch a Nazi in the face.
That's right. All right. Each Monday, we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
So long.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Goodbye, darling.